The Doctor, Ian, Barbara, and Vicky land on the strange planet Vortis after a holiday in ancient Rome, and immediately things seem out of sorts. They learn the planet has been taken over by the bodiless Animus, which has possessed the minds of the ant-like Zabi to drive out the native Menoptera. However, the Menoptera intend on retaking Vortis, and the Doctor and friends find themselves fighting alongside them to defeat Animus. This is the story of The Web Planet, a 6-episode serial from the 2nd season of Doctor Who. In the Doctor Who fandom, there are certain generally agreed upon sentiments. Spearhead from space is cinema, the twin dilemma is terrible, things like that. But oftentimes I find myself at odds with fan consensus. Sometimes I'll watch a highly acclaimed serial and find myself utterly underwhelmed, and others I'll watch something that's considered bad by most and fall completely in love with it. Such is the case with The Web Planet. When my Blu-ray copy of Season 2 arrived, I naturally binged a lot, eager to relive the adventures of the first Doctor and his companions. When I got to The Web Planet, I was completely hooked, and the 6-episode runtime was a breeze to get through. So imagine my surprise when I logged on and found out everyone else hates it. There are some elements of The Web Planet that don't quite work, but the disdain the serial appears to trigger in people is utterly mystifying to me. In fact, the qualities that people complain about in the serial are why it's so endearing to me. So I thought I'd take a moment to go out to bat for the funny little creatures that live on Vortis and the adventure the Doctor and company find themselves on. In short, The Web Planet is good. You guys are just mean. The Web Planet, as I mentioned earlier, is 6 episodes long. This puts its total runtime at something like 2.5 hours, which for context is about the same length as your average Christopher Nolan movie. Some argue this is entirely too much time to be spent on a concept like the Doctor fights bipedal ants and a voice that lives in a web. And the thing is, I can see the merit in that statement, but for my money, if this was cut down to 4 episodes or something, part of what makes it so compelling to me would be lost. If there is one thing The Web Planet has going for it, it is atmosphere. From the moment the TARDIS lands on Vortis, the serial is thick with an eeriness, one that is amplified by the direction of the show, which I will return to in due course. It almost feels dreamlike. It genuinely puts me in mind of David Lynch, whose films also unfold a dreamlike world in a very careful and often slow pace. Yes, I did just compare the Silly Bug serial to the work of the man who made Mulholland Drive. Leave me alone. Let's take the first episode, for example, which crawls along as it establishes the world of Vortis and its strange atmosphere. In all honesty, not much happens in this episode. If we were being ruthless, most of it would end up on the cutting room floor for pacing. But if we did that, we'd lose a lot of really good moments. For example, there's this lengthy exchange between Barbara and Vicky and the TARDIS, where they discuss topics ranging from the events of the previous serial, The Romans, to medicine. The gag of Vicky considering aspirin a barbaric medication is a really clever one, as it reminds us that she is of a different time to Ian and Barbara. Scenes like this really help to flesh out the TARDIS team, something that's necessary when you've got a team of more than 3 people. One thing I will criticize Season 19 for, much though I love a lot of it, is that with it all being done in 4-parters and 1 2-parter, you don't get a lot of room to develop the 5th Doctor, Tegan, Nyssa, and Adric as individuals. The result is at least one of them is viciously sidelined per serial to make sure they have time for the plot. The slower approach to serials like The Web Planet ensures that this isn't a problem, and our understanding of Ian, Barbara, Vicky, and the Doctor is all the richer for it. I also don't think this serial is guilty of anything pacing-wise that the rest of Hartnell's run isn't. By and large, the pacing of this era of Doctor Who is pretty slow. Truth be told, I much more tolerate the pacing here than in serials like The Crusade or The Dalek Invasion of Earth. Yep, I'm gonna get cooked for that one. I will touch on the story and the writing a bit more later, but at the moment my current mission is to speedrun the main complaints about this serial and justify them. We've already covered one of the big ones, that being the pacing, so let's move on to the other biggie, the visual representation of this serial. Now, this is the big one people like to harp on, the execution of this serial. The aliens look so doofy and cringe. It's all so fake. My friends, it is my opinion that you have missed the point. The common refrain I see in discussions on this serial is that Bill Strutton had turned in a script that was punching way over what Doctor Who could achieve on its shoestring budget, and that the result was a slipshod attempt at realizing the story realistically. Now, first of all, I'm not convinced there's such a thing as a story that's too ambitious for Doctor Who. Inferno features alternate worlds and a bleak cliffhanger where the entire planet is consumed in fire, and this is realized perfectly by Barry Lett's keen understanding of what to show and when. Need the world to end? Orange-tinted and fog-filled location shoots, the sound of wind and dogs howling, a bit of cheeky stock footage, and a single CSO shot of a lava tsunami. It's basic, but it sells the concept perfectly. I think occasions where it looks like they were punching above their weight are more down to the director's choices. The Time Monster looked to me like director Paul Bernard took the script very literally in his direction, resulting in, well, this. But the Web Planet is not a case of either Doctor Who not having the money to do something or a director missing the mark. This serial looks like this on purpose. Everything in these 6 episodes feels like it was very deliberately placed there. Richard Martin, the serial's director, knew exactly what he was doing. Now, everyone is right in saying that Doctor Who could never realistically recreate a planet as alien as Vortis with the 2 and 9pence they had to pay for it. So what does Martin do? Not try to do that. Instead, Martin seems to have been taking a page from the expressionist films of 1920s Germany, a movement that spawned films like The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and inspired works such as Fritz Lang's Metropolis. These weren't films that were trying to create realistic settings, but used a sort of heightened reality to communicate ideas. The goal with the Web Planet wasn't to build a realistic portrayal of Vortis, but to create something that conveyed the intended feeling, that eeriness the serial leans heavily on. In this way, the serial succeeds massively. Vortis doesn't necessarily look realistic, but it looks very, very alien. It's also worth noting that the Web Planet, much like all of studio sessions for classic Doctor Who, was shot in multi-camera style, lending itself to a more live performance style. I think Martin was also leaning into this a lot with his direction of the Web Planet, presenting it more as live theatre than as television as we're used to it today. This is also readily apparent in the realization of the Menoptera and the Optera. The costumes for these guys aren't remotely convincing, but if seen in the context of this being presented as theatre, it's fine? I mean, I get the idea. They're butterfly bee people. The same goes for their performances, and doubly so for the bizarre choices made for the Optera's performances. Are they weird, and in the case of the Optera, kind of off-putting? Sure, but I didn't question it. They're aliens. They're weird. In fact, the airy line delivery specific to the Menoptera add to the weird dreamlike nature of this serial. I can't help but wonder if there's a generational disconnect between when this serial went out and today's audiences. Perhaps this live theatre feeling this serial had fit perfectly within the television audience's suspension of disbelief in 1965 in a way that it generally doesn't now. Now, what I will concede is the beeping noise the Zarbi make gets old fairly quickly. I mean, I have a high tolerance for Doctor Who annoying sound effects. I can and will defend Cary Blyton's score for the Silurians, but even I wanted the Zarbi to shut the hell up by the end of this one. It is a bit much. I can personally live with it, but I can't argue with anyone who can't. But overall, the best thing about this serial, as I noted earlier, is that it has a very distinct atmosphere, unlike anything else the show has broadcast. By this virtue, even if I wasn't keen on anything else, it would still be ahead of a lot of Doctor Who. See, the worst thing Doctor Who can be is boring. I've said that before, I think, on my Third Doctor Ranked video. Serials like The Monster of Peladon or Colony in Space, which have little to no distinct personality, are what grind my gears the most, because they go through the motions of a Doctor Who serial without actually saying anything. But the Web Planet is actively doing something different, gaining a noticeable personality in the process. It's something I will always admire, especially if it's an ambitious experiment like this one. So far, my ultimate point is that the Web Planet is a very different beast to regular Doctor Who. It's a lot more experimental, being more like an expressionist theatre production than television as we watch it today. I personally think it was a massive risk to try something this out there on the show, both in terms of style and scope. But my general point is that you shouldn't judge it like you would something like Genesis of the Daleks or City of Death. You have to approach it on its own terms. And when you do, I find there's a lot to appreciate about it. In fact, without its bizarre nature, I think a lot of what it presents would be somewhat defanged. Maybe it's because I was really invested in this serial, but when I came out the end of it, my ultimate takeaway is that the Web Planet is in equal parts really beautiful and utterly haunting. The beauty I've touched on, the eerie, dreamlike nature, is really pretty to me. But the horror comes from the animus, what it is and what it does. See, there's some very specific language used when referring to the Animus and the structure it builds for itself. See, at first, it's seen by the Doctor and his companions as a web, hence the title. But over the serial, we learn a few things. The Animus's web is made up of minerals mined from the surface of Vortis by Menoptera slaves, chemically altered by acid. The web itself comes to be known as the carcinome, a structure that grows and consumes the planet. In short, the Animus is essentially a sentient cancer, corrupting the surface of the planet and eating it away. It's a horrifying concept, one that's underlined by the mystery of where it came from. It's almost eldritch in nature, making it all the more daunting a foe for the Doctor to face off against. This would already be a pretty creepy idea for a Doctor Who serial, but the specific atmosphere of the web planet accentuates it. The expressionist approach to the serial makes Animus truly, completely alien. It feels unlike any other villain on the show, making it all the more creepy and unique. What makes the Animus all the more terrifying is that it is utterly cruel and heartless. It cares nothing for the beings that live on Vortis, possessing the Zabi and systematically driving the Menoptera away. It even has the wings ripped off any Menoptera it enslaves, grounding them forever. This especially rang as deeply horrifying to me, calling to mind images of children tearing wings off bugs. Doctor Who doesn't often describe a systematic torture that explicitly, and I imagine they only got away with it on family programming because the Menoptera are so alien. It's truly haunting stuff regardless, and it makes the dreamlike feel of the serial approach being a nightmare. I could here speculate that this serial was a commentary on invasion as a general practice, likening an invasion force to a cruel and pitiless cancer, but I suspect I could be reaching there. Doctor Who was still largely children's programming at the time, so I don't imagine politics was something they were bringing into it yet, but the read is there if you really want to pull that apart. I want to come back to the point I made earlier about the moments that make this serial work, because there's another example that lends nicely to my point about this serial being kind of dark but weirdly beautiful. Late in the serial, Ian has found himself in league with the Optera, a sort of larval form of the Menoptera. They're making their way to the Animus to fight, but on the trip they run into an acid pool, one that one of the Optera named Namini sacrifices herself to plug for everyone else's safety. This wasn't a character we'd taken much notice of before, but her death is presented as being every bit as horrifying as drowning in acid would be. This on its own is pretty dark, but it's what happens next that fascinates me. The other Optera seem almost unfazed by Namini's death. They shout and jump for a second, but then move on, leaving Ian staring in confusion. Weird? Yes, but oddly touching. The show has made plain to us that this is how the Optera mourn their dead, that in a way they were saying they were now fighting for her. Ian understands this too, but doesn't react to death the same way. He's still horrified by what he's seen. The difference in reaction here makes the Optera and the world of Vortis seem a lot more alien, but it sympathizes with that otherworldliness. It's really, really well done. The Web Planet is a weird serial. There's no doubt about that, but it is in no way a bad one. Now, again, if it's not exactly your cup of tea, I can understand that, but hating it, I can't wrap my head around that. In fact, it is my opinion that serials like The Web Planet ought to be celebrated and even encouraged. Doctor Who is frequently at its most interesting when it's being experimental. I'm currently working my way through season 18, and while I can't claim to always consider the serials in that season a hit, there is frequently something new that they're trying that I have to respect. The special effects in The Leisure Hive, the attempt at blending gothic horror with the hard sci-fi in State of Decay, the funereal tone of Metropolis. I find this holds true for modern Doctor Who as well. Midnight and Wild Blue Yonder are episodes that stray far from the usual Doctor Who formula, and they've wound up to be two of my favourite episodes from the modern run by miles. My point is, we should encourage Doctor Who to not play it safe, to try new and weird things. Sometimes it'll fall flat, like the musical number in The Church on Ruby Road did for me, but I respected the sheer audacity of that concept, just as I respect the commitment to building an alien world in an abstract manner on the Web Planet. I guess my overall point is, give the Web Planet another chance. Don't watch it with the expectations of normal Doctor Who. Approach it on its own terms, and maybe you'll see something new, something to appreciate, or even love.